So, what's the situation with the election of the Frente Sandinista on, what date was it? February? No, that was the last time round. November the 6th, last year. When this happened, as I went through it, I was part of the Frente Sandinista election campaign. First of all, I didn't think we would win. Not many people thought we would win. Because it was based on a gamble. That is, by making this alliance with the church and other forces, including ex-Contras came into the Sandinista alliance. The major indigenous party on the Caribbean coast came into this alliance. By making this alliance, it might be possible to go above the 35% to win on the first round. They come into the government on a program of national unity and reconciliation that is not on a program of promoting workers' and farmers' struggle against the local capitalists, not even on a program of waging an anti-imperialist struggle as they are doing in Venezuela, but more on a program of national reconciliation in order to revive the economy. Now, on one level that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because most people are starving to death. Most people judge you by whether you can create jobs, by what your proposals are to solve their elementary problems. They don't judge you on whether you can, convince them of a longer-term program to solve the problem once and for all, right? World socialism, some people call it. Other people say, Latin American socialism, why others, have different formulas. But this was not the issue in this election campaign. And it worked on an electoral level. But it did something that the Sandinista leadership didn't expect. It completely transformed the political feelings and consciousness among the Sandinista masses. Because overnight, we have again our president. We have the government. I can see and hear this in the mountains, in the rural areas, in the poor neighborhoods. There was enormous celebration that went on for 4 days. Because people thought that the United States or the right wing wouldn't accept the election results. So they went into the streets and they stayed there until the U.S. embassy said, we accept the results. And then they started thinking, why can't we go back to the revolution? Why can't we have free education? Why can't we have free health? Why can't we have another agrarian reform? Fortunately, the Frente Sandinista leadership, even though they did not expect this to be so energetic, so much a factor in politics, they were prepared for this with their own program. And they set out on a course. The very day of the inauguration of the new president, Ortega announced that Nicaragua was allied with Cuba and Venezuela and joined ALBA. Right? That very day there were agreements signed with Venezuela for massive Venezuelan aid to Nicaragua, which will amount over the next, what is now known, over the next 3 years will amount to over $3 billion of aid. Far more than we ever got from the United States, right? In the recent times at least. Free education is introduced and free health. A literacy crusade which the Frente Sandinista had started 2 years ago based on the Cuban method, the Yo se puede. This comes to a conclusion in Managua last week. Managua is now free of illiteracy. But the government launched this campaign, they transferred it from an NGO level campaign to a major priority of the Ministry of Education with considerable resources and even more and more Cuban aid. The Cubans had already sent something like 50,000 televisions and all kinds of teachers and so on operating sub-government level. Then it became a government program. Managua was now free of illiteracy. That is, we're now challenged to go from 34% back down to 12, which we got in 1980, and then even lower if we can get it there. The farm credit program has been re-established. Again, the Venezuelans are a big part of this. They set up a development bank that's operating in Nicaragua, and credits are being given at low interest rates, well below the commercial rate, to farmers. Because Venezuela has guaranteed cheap oil, subsidized prices, 20-year credits, low interest, and also that Nicaragua can pay in agricultural products. They don't have to pay in dollars. Because Venezuela needs to import food. They're still a food importing country. They want to get over that, but they still are. Those are some of the positive things, right? I can't avoid telling you some of the negative stuff or I'll get criticized. There are negative things, things that have not been possible or that result from false concepts. The first big problem, and here I don't think much could have been done, in the last government and National Assembly, the country voted to enter the free trade agreement with the United States, the Central American and Dominican Republic free trade agreement. The Sandinista decided not to disrupt this, to just go with it and see, see what happens, and if they are going to get out of it or challenge it, they want to be able to do it on the basis of real evidence. That is, not what we think will happen, or that we know will happen because we weren't born yesterday, but what really happens, where the evidence is conclusive. So this will take 2-3 years to unwind. But in the meantime, drive into the ALBA, right? Into the agreements with Cuba, Venezuela, and Iran. This is another thing that stunned me. Someone had said to me just before the election that an Ortega government would immediately set out to denounce the United States and Bush for the war in Iraq and call for the U.S. to get out, but would go beyond that and ally with Iran in those very months where we thought the U.S. was going to bomb Iran. And we had the Iranian president come to Nicaragua a week after the elections, sign agreements of trade and aid, and offer, and then Daniel Ortega has been to Iran since then as well, and there's a growing relationship between the two regimes that are not based on deep political agreement between the two. In many ways, they're quite opposite in their social and class outlooks. But on one big issue, they're united. One big issue unites them: the USA, the war, the imperialist domination, the exploitation of third world countries. On that, they are united. The other big area, two other big areas where I feel disappointed so far in the work of the government, is that in the government inherited right away the budget prepared by the old government, the outgoing government, which was a classic, even more savage neoliberal budget than previous ones. The Sandinistas decided not to do much with it. They decided they couldn't get a new budget through the National Assembly. It would be, if they tried to tamper too much with it, they would be voted down. So they tampered, they did a few changes to it. They increased the education spending and the health spending. They put some money into the credits for the farm, rural areas and so on. But essentially, what they didn't tamper with, and this is something that can never get through the current National Assembly, they didn't reform the tax system. The rich in Nicaragua do not pay taxes. Corporations do not pay taxes. They just find ways around them and no one bothers them. If a middle-class doctor fails to pay his or her taxes, it's very possible a tax collector will find out and they'll end up, with many debts because of interest and maybe even go to jail. But these rich folks, they don't even pay taxes for their houses because they put them in the names of members of their family who are senior citizens. And senior citizens don't have to pay property taxes. Right? So, in a poor country, if you can't tax the rich, who've got already 40% of the national wealth, how the hell can you have government programs and social infrastructure and roads and bridges, hospitals? You can't. And so this problem eventually has to be confronted. But it's too soon to have that confrontation, the government believes. I think they're probably right. But they can't avoid it. It's not an issue that will go away. In the first year, the government got around it because another mystery of world politics. On the eve of the Sandinista election victory, several countries forgave Nicaragua of almost $800 million of debt. So overnight comes available all the programmed interest payments and capital payments on that debt, and that was all thrown into the education and health system, because that was money the National Assembly had not legislated what to do with it. So it became discretional of the president, went into these expenditures. The other thing that helped the country is that in the economic arrangements with Venezuela, the Venezuelan government and the Nicaraguan government have decided that since they cannot control what happens to this wealth that's donated, if the National Assembly decides, for example, to use the wealth to pay government expenditures and reduce the tax level for the rich, there's nothing they can do. It's a law. You have to abide by the law. We still operate under the Constitution. So what they decided to do is they set up a private mixed company with Venezuela. And all this aid is going to come through Albanesa, right? It's called Albanesa, an acronym. Well, think about that, right? I've been a revolutionary socialist since 1959, since the Cubans inspired me, right? When I first heard that, I thought, I don't like this. You know, all this wealth and aid coming in, and it's going to go through a mixed company. But then I thought, well, would I rather have it end up in the control of the rich who control the National Assembly? I think it's a better compromise right now, what they're doing. But of course, it's a two-edged sword. Because if things go downhill, if there are defeats, then all of that, I'm reminded all of the Cuban aid, the big sugar mill, the huge dairy farm project, which was also Canadian, the big canning factories in Sebaco, they were sold off to the private capitalists in the early 90s for a song, like the electrical system. So this is a difficult problem, but I'm just informing you, that's a solution for now. What will happen to it, I cannot predict. The Sandinistas, confronted with this problem of being a minority in the parliament, and essentially probably still a minority in the population, because of the factors I mentioned earlier. The majority of people in Nicaragua are thinking today and tonight, what are we going to eat tomorrow? Like I say, should I send my kid to school without breakfast, and so on? Faced with this situation, and they're under very brutal attack now from the right and from La Prensa newspaper, the television media, the United States embassy, and so on, the Sandinista government has set out to organize a system of community councils. They're called Councils of Community Power. The idea for this comes from Venezuela, where this is also happening. I think many of you might be aware of this development in Venezuela. The concept here is that municipal governments, the central government, the regional governments on the Caribbean coast, should be accountable not just in a constitutional sense to their legislatures or their city councils or municipal councils. They should be audited and accountable to grassroots movements and organizations in terms of their budget, in terms of their performance, and in terms of what people want to see done, what programs they want to be implemented. And so this, by presidential decree, a whole system of councils are being organized. We now have somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 people involved. The target by September will be 1 million, and there are about 8,000 different community councils. They're mostly in the larger cities, although in some of the bigger, more heavily populated rural areas as well, they are. And they will continue to grow. And the Sandinista Frente Sandinista concept for these councils is a situation in which, do you still use the word civil society up here to describe NGOs and some unions, or I don't know. Well, anyway, this is a big thing in all of Latin America. Civil society. It's mostly NGOs and professional people. But all of civil society is against the Sandinistas. They think the Sandinistas are going to get us into another war with the United States, that we don't do things democratically, that not everything should be for the poor. What about the middle class? All kinds of stuff, right? But it's almost 100% in the NGOs and so on, critical of the Sandinistas. Then you have the entire press against the Sandinista government. Most of the televisions, except one that's controlled by the Sandinistas. In the radios, the Sandinistas are stronger than the right wing. That's the survival of the revolution. And that's important because most people listen to radio. But faced with this problem, the concept for the councils is to mobilize the population to defend the gains that are being made. Free education is under attack because the people say it's bad and makes bad economic sense, right, in a poor country. Free health is under attack for the same reason, right? And there's all kinds of far-out criticism. What's the point of having a free clinic if there's no medicine in the clinic? Well, if you're sick, you'd at least like to see a doctor, right? But this is the kind of argument, right? Well, it's true, there's no medicine, there's still no money for it. That'll come, but the most important thing is for people who are seriously ill to be able to see a doctor, or at least a trained nurse. And right down the line, the biggest attack, of course, is on the alliance with Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. The right wing and the U.S. Embassy are hysterical about this. And so there's a tremendous ideological warfare opened up in Nicaragua. It's opened up in a situation where the Frente Sandinista leadership itself is not united. There are at least two, and I believe, because of my own involvement, 3 currents operating in the Frente Sandinista. At the government level, for certain there are 2. One of them wants to go with developing the economy on capitalist lines and would have preferred that this whole alliance with Venezuela and Cuba had been left for later. That's how they saw it, right? The other one who says no, because the line of going with the free trade agreement and the IMF is not going to work. It's okay to try it, to have it there, you get from them what you can, just like it's okay to take everything you can from Taiwan, but that's not the way out. The way out is ALBA. Am I assuming things here? Do everyone know what ALBA is? The Economic and Trade Alliance between Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, and now Cuba. And it's now drawn in Ecuador and some Caribbean countries, and Haiti is in the ALBA, in different levels. So there's this debate going on, not just in the country as a whole, but inside the Frente Sandinista. And the debate is starting to pick up at the rank and file level. It's broken out of the internal framework of cabinet meetings and high-level meetings of the National Assembly of the party and so on, and now into the neighborhoods. And you hear things like people saying, well, I'm not so sure because last time we tried this, the U.S. invaded us, right? Like, maybe this is risky. You hear that a lot from very strong Sandinistas, right? They don't want to have that happen again, right? And then you hear other people say, okay, but what's your proposal? What do you suggest we do? So this is very positive, right? That in the population as a whole, we're starting to see the first breaks with the terrible depression of the defeat of the revolution and this impoverishing of the country, and the whole idea that, the most I can do in life is just solve my own problems and maybe make life a little better for my kids, and the rest just has to be what it will be. That prevailing mood is beginning to shift, and there's a sense of hope, and it's not for nothing that ALBA, the acronym, means dawn. It means the sunrise, a new hope in Nicaragua and throughout the region. Thank you.